70,000 to 30,000 years ago was an important time in the evolution of the Homo sapiens. This time dates a long event of the cognitive revolution, which marks the period in which humans learned to use language more integrally and abstractly. The Homo sapiens was just one out of many different human species, but this advanced form of communication might be the biggest contributor to them sort of winning natural selection. The ending of species like Homo erectus, meaning upright humans, or Neanderthals, is widely theorized, but frankly, there hasn't been a clear scientific thesis that will explain why they died out, rather than the Homo sapiens, wise humans. Theories suggest that aggression by the Homo sapiens, possible competition for resources, or having interbred with the Homo sapiens are reasons for this to occur.
But there's also a more brutal one.
Either way, clear communication between tribesmen and women allowed the Homo sapiens to share myths and beliefs, which exist entirely in the collective imagination. These tribal identities and social hierarchies would go on to bind large groups of people in a way that had never been possible before. In Mesopotamia, around 3400 BC, the Sumerians invented cuneiform, using wedge-sharp marks pressed into clay tablets to record transactions and events. Similarly, the ancient Egyptians developed hieroglyphs, an intricate system of writing that combines symbols and phonetic sounds. Hieroglyphs also meaning sacred texts. The city of Sumer had tens of thousands of people, a lot of traffic, and required a vast structure for distribution, cultivation of crops, and many more. In such ancient times, how do you expect these earnest workers to keep tracks of economics? Unlike us, who have an automated digital system, they were the first civilization of such an enormous scale, dating from around 5500 BC to 1800 BC. They were practically forced to keep records of sorts, so they started writing down all that information on their tablets, storing them close to their warehouse so they could keep track of their supplies. Interestingly, at the same type of location that exists for worship, a temple warehouse of sorts. The first written text of law was written by Ur-Nammu in ancient Mesopotamia on tablets in the first Sumerian language C. Tablets by the Sumerians were kept in large chambers, stacked on top of each other, and occupied a lot of space. The law of Ur-Nammu consisted of entirely casuistic statements. For example, if a man commits murder, that man must be killed. Over the generations, systems have been refined. Sumerian text definitely acted as a foundation, but ultimately was inefficient as a lot of text was left to interpretation. So if a different worker looked at a temple warehouse, they may not understand what that person had exactly written down. Of course, they worked a lot on unified symbolic representations of things such as grains, and it still went on a lot from there, as their writing evolved further with history and experiences. With the passing of time, their language grew simpler, more commonly spoken, and easier to learn, making communication and keeping of inventory much easier. Other interesting inventions next to writing consist of hydraulic engineering and the mass production of pottery and textiles using mills. Let's head over to ancient Egypt, which was established in 3150 BC. Egypt is one of the oldest civilizations and one that we know a lot about especially. Not only have they left us with many monuments, objects, and artifacts, who were recovered from archaeological dig sites, who were recovered with hieroglyphs, but also had written these on records made out of papyrus. Despite its difficulty learning and deciphering these scripts, modern civilization would only find these scripts but also learn to translate their language into ours, transferring their imagined beliefs of actual history onto written texts. The Rosetta Stone, for example, helped translators discover that hieroglyphs represented syllables, which contributed to the eventual translation of these Egyptian ancient texts. Most intriguing was, however, the discovery that shed light on the pyramid's construction. Papyri texts that were only discovered in caves of the Red Sea in 2013. The ancient Greek writer Herodotus tells us that he heard from priests of Egypt that the pyramids were created by slaves. Nevertheless, archaeology has shown that these workers were in fact paid to do so. Perhaps not very consistently. A diary was written by a construction official named Merer, who is said to have moved more than 200 blocks of limestone each month together with his workers. Another notable discovery were the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found in the mid-20th century around the Judean desert. Notably, about 30% of these consisted of sectarian manuscripts of previously unknown documents, shedding light on the rules and beliefs within greater Judaism. Most notably the community rule, which classifies sectarian from non-sectarian. Thousands of years later, these particular pieces of knowledge fall into humankind's hands. they were interpreted and studied. For me, the most interesting part is the insight into humanity's ancient imaginary order. Let's make a simple comparison between imaginary human order, which for example are morals and beliefs that evolve with time, and animal order that is driven by instinct. A quote which I've read in the book Sapiens, written by Yuval Noah Harari, but so far, researchers have failed to locate lawyer bees. Bees don't need lawyers, because there is no danger that they might forget or violate the hive constitution. Meanwhile, our constitutions are entirely imaginary, like the American Constitution, which at this point has been operating since 1789, more than 200 years. From an entirely evolutionary standpoint, he would say that this order too is just imagined, yet still speaks to so many Americans and gives them pride and identity. How do you cause people to believe in an imagined order such as Christianity, democracy, or capitalism? First, you never admit that the order is imagined. In comparison to animals, we humans are capable of creating these systems, perhaps since the cognitive revolution. The last, most famous quote says that you could never convince a monkey to give you a banana by promising him limitless bananas after death and monkey heaven. But can you convince a human like that? Well, most certainly. This is the foundation of many sacred belief systems. Even so, it is not my place to judge or compare any religious beliefs. But these beliefs are the foundation of great things. This ability to transfer thoughts over generations, give instructions, or express ourselves has allowed humankind to make vast strides to develop our understanding of the universe, other mentalities, or ourselves. Why else do you think was the city of Sumer able to grow so large? Because they had a system, and religious beliefs tying them together and giving each citizen responsibilities. Back to me. Today, we find ourselves in a time of constant traffic. What I'm about to say is a total no-brainer, but it's gonna help me bring a point across. Not only has writing evolved in a literally or poetic sense, but also became the foundation of multi-million dollar movies, company branding and marketing, or digital communication to speak to a wider audience, and learning has been unified for all of us to understand. Heck, taking every translated portion of the Bible into consideration, so the Old and New Testament, we're talking about nearly 3,700 different languages you can read the Bible in. To think that the Old Testament alone, originally written in Hebrew, later translated in Aramaic, Greek, and Syriac, has now over 1,000 translations today. At second place stands Little Prince, proudly, with about 571 translations as of February 2024. Tools like AI assist us in increasing productivity and adding ease to the process. Professions like typewriting, freelance, or owning an active and engaging blog with a lot of traffic are a total trend too. In modern theoretical science, academic research contributes to a bigger picture. Take a topic, write about it, and make a literature review. A literature review is a piece of academic writing where the writer demonstrates the current knowledge and understanding of the topic that they want to present. If, for example, you were to write about climate change, you would find a lot of research, but also a lot of contradicting works. A lot of it is playing in its favor and a lot of it isn't. It's up to the author to take a specific standing and explain their views purely based on others' work backing them up. The academic community uses citation indices for research and evaluation of scientific literature output and measure output. These indices essentially measure the giant bandwidth of interconnection between scientific papers, a massive network of sharing, interpreting, and evaluating knowledge. But I want to take a step back from all that and talk about your own personal twists. I have previously alluded to the topic in this video. Historical diaries have greatly contributed to discovering more about the state of life all those years ago. Diaries of historical figures have been serialized and can be bought or downloaded online. The Diary of Lena Mukina, Samuel Pepys, and most famously known, The Diary of a Little Girl, its author of course being Anne Frank. But what about the smaller, less well-known ones? Well, I've read through portions of Charlotta Hayes' diary during the 1918 flu pandemic in America. The 14-year-old girl started writing around 2 months before World War I ended, around the time the influenza pandemic really took off. It gave the average reader a great perspective on American day-to-day life during the war. I think better than much literature or internet books could describe it. Sure, there was a certain innocence in these written letters. I'm sure Charlotta Hay knew what was going on around her, like she too couldn't possibly comprehend what was happening around the war sites. Here's a quote on her last diary entry on November 11th, 1918, before she started her second diary. Clear and cool, school opened this morning. Mother washed. Mr. and Mrs. Umberger called during the afternoon. Mrs. Umberger also brought Mother a bouquet of chrysanthemums, which were lovely. Today the Kaiser, Wilhelm II of Germany, signed the armistice, thus ending the World War. All other countries have given up some time ago. Small, personal diaries share stories within the grand things, but to get a peek into this usual day-to-day life of older times is really refreshing. The mentalities of people back then is a lot different from what you might expect. But I could go on and talk about the ephemerides of Alexander the Great's expedition, if I actually read it. So instead, I want to talk about another, older one. The Vindolanda tablets date back to between 1st to early 2nd AD, from within the Roman Empire, and are a mixture between officially military matters and personal messages to their families and slaves. Written by various military officials, they gave a clear indication of life of northern Roman Britain. Let's dive into some contents worth mentioning. First, one from Wikipedia. Cavalry Centurion Masculus wrote an inquiry on his instructions for his men for the following day, including a polite request for more beer to be sent to the garrison, as they previously consumed the entire stock of alcohol that they had. Further research on the webpage Vindolanda Tablets Online indicates that said beer was in fact brewed locally. The site gave a rough indication on the day-to-day life of the military personnel, measuring of activities and inventory including equipment and foods and so on. There isn't a clear indication on the presence of civilians, but a minor maltreatment of one, although the writers themselves concluded the possible presence of a few is in fact quite strong. We have arrived at the part of the video where I finally mention why any of this is actually important at all to the contents of this video. Historical facts are always interesting to the average ear, but you can just as easily just look them up on your own or look for a more specific video. Writing has been passed down from generation to generation. Discovered scriptures are interpreted and finds are published and added to historical data. Whether you keep a personal journal that will get published after you die is up to you, but these words should be written for yourself only. Some of these historical diaries and writings weren't just written to preserve history. They weren't originally intended for classrooms, museums, or documentaries. These were personal, intimate records of life as it was experienced by individuals at specific moments of time, written for themselves, not for an audience. And that's the key point I want to drive home today. In our fast-paced, hyper-connected world where content is churned out for likes, clicks, and shares, the simple act for writing yourself has almost become a lost art. But here's why it matters. When you write without the expectations of it being read, you become more honest and unfiltered. You're not trying to impress anyone, and you're not bending your words to fit someone else's narrative. You write trying to understand your own thoughts, to process your emotions, and to create a dialogue between the present you and the person that you might become tomorrow. Whether it's a journal entry about your day, a collection of random thoughts, or even a letter to your future self, the act of putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard grounds you. It forces you to slow down and listen to the voice inside of you that often gets drowned out by the noise of the outside world. Historical records aside, these writings offer something invaluable, which is perspective. When you look back at the things that you've written, whether days or months or years from now, you'll see growth, change, and maybe even patterns in your life that you hadn't noticed before. You're documenting your human experience. And that's something no algorithm, no AI, or any other person can replicate. It's uniquely yours. I notice it when I write by myself in particular. 3 months ago, problem after problem started to snowball into a huge mess. I was definitely overthinking it back then, and when I go back to read what I've written, I kind of just sit there and laugh. Maybe myself because on how simple it might actually seem right now. So, as you wrap things up, here's my advice. Write for yourself. It doesn't have to be poetic, profound, or even coherent at times. But make it a practice, because in the end you'll find that those moments of personal reflection are some of the most meaningful and maybe even historical records of them all. As usual, thank you for making it this far into this video. If you enjoy this kind of content, be sure to tell me if you like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope you're gonna have a great day. Bye!